The mail-order bride stood too tall on the wooden platform, her dark skin catching the harsh Montana sun as Dutch van der Berg took one look and declared her unfit for marriage. The crowd gathered like vultures around carrion, their whispers sharp as winter wind. Michan Washington held her spine straight despite the weight of 100 stares. Her carpetbag felt heavy in her gloved hands. The train that brought her here was already pulling away, black smoke dissolving into the pale sky. Dutch adjusted his vest and stepped back. His face carried the expression of a man who'd ordered beef and received mutton. The townspeople murmured their approval of his rejection, their voices a chorus of small-town certainty. She had traveled 3 days from Georgia with nothing but hope in her life savings sewn into her dress hem. The letters Dutch had written spoke of loneliness and partnership. They mentioned nothing about height requirements or skin tone preferences. The autumn air bit through her traveling dress. Winter was coming to Deadwood Gulch, and she stood stranded in its path with empty pockets and nowhere to rest her head. A man across the street watched the scene unfold. His jaw worked like he was chewing bitter medicine. Arthur Morgan had seen enough cruelty to recognize it when it wore the mask of propriety. Dutch turned to the crowd, playing to their prejudices. He spoke about propriety and expectations, about what a man needed in a wife. Each word landed on Michan like a physical blow, but she refused to flinch. The station master cleared his throat and asked about her return ticket. She had none. The money was gone, spent on the journey west and the hope of a new life. The crowd began to disperse, their entertainment concluded. Arthur crossed the dusty street. His boots struck the ground with purpose, each step a small act of defiance against the town's collective judgment. He approached Michan with his hat in his hands. She watched him come, her dark eyes wary. Every white man in her experience had wanted something from her, labor or servitude or worse. Trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. He stopped 3 feet away, close enough to speak without the crowd hearing. His weathered face carried lines that spoke of hard living and harder choices. When he opened his mouth, his voice came out rough as sandpaper. "Ma'am, I got work at my ranch if you're willing." The offer hung between them like morning mist. Michan studied his face, searching for the trap she knew must be there. Men didn't help women like her without expecting payment in form she wouldn't give. What kind of work? Honest work. Cooking, cleaning, bookkeeping, if you got the schooling for it. Room and board plus wages. The wind picked up, stirring the dust around their feet. Michan felt the weight of the town's eyes still upon her, judging, measuring, finding her lacking. Winter was coming, and pride wouldn't keep her warm. Dutch had moved to the saloon porch, where he held court with his friends. Their laughter carried across the street, sharp and cutting. She was their entertainment now, the tall woman who'd dared to dream above her station. Arthur waited for her answer. He didn't fidget or look away. There was something solid about him, like a tree that had weathered many storms and still stood upright. But trust was dangerous, and she'd learned that lesson well. "Why would you help me?" The question seemed to pain him. His gray eyes looked past her toward the mountains, where snow already capped the peaks. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of old grief. "Because it's the right thing to do." The train whistle echoed from the distance, a lonely sound that matched the emptiness in her chest. She had 2 choices: accept his offer or face the approaching winter with nothing but the clothes on her back. Michan looked at Dutch one last time. He was smaller than she'd imagined from his letters, a man who shrank from anything that challenged his narrow view of the world. She'd crossed half the continent for him, and he'd discarded her like spoiled meat. The decision crystallized in her mind like ice forming on still water. She would take Arthur's offer, but she would watch him carefully. Trust would have to be earned, and she'd learn to be a hard teacher. "I'll work for you, but I want my wages in coin, not promises." Arthur nodded and placed his hat back on his head. The brim shadowed his eyes, but she caught something there that might have been relief. He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 bay horses. "My ranch is 5 miles. Out. We'll get you settled before dark." She followed him across the street, her head high despite the whispers that trailed behind her. The wagon was old, but sturdy, like everything else in this hard country. Arthur helped her up to the seat, his touch brief and respectful. As they drove away from town, Machan didn't look back. The future stretched ahead like an unmarked trail, dangerous and uncertain. But she was still alive, still free, and still fighting. That would have to be enough. The wagon wheels carved ruts through dust that hadn't seen rain in weeks. Arthur's hands rested steady on the reins, calloused fingers. Speaking of years wrestling with stubborn land, Machan sat beside him, her back straight as a fence post, watching the horizon swallow the sun. They rode in silence through country that stretched endless as her doubts. Sagebrush dotted the landscape like gray ghosts, and mountains loomed distant as forgotten promises. The air smelled of coming winter and dying grass. Arthur's ranch house squatted against the twilight, weathered wood and broken dreams made manifest. The barn leaned heavy to one side, its roof patched with mismatched planks. Cattle grazed in pastures where the grass grew thin and yellow. He helped her down from the wagon, his touch brief and careful. The gesture held more respect than she'd received from any man in recent memory. Still, she kept her guard up. Kindness was often cruelty wearing a pleasant mask. The house interior told stories of neglect and loneliness. Dust layered every surface thick as her skepticism. Dishes sat unwashed in a basin, and papers scattered across a table like leaves after a storm. The hearth held cold ashes. "Been managing. Alone since my foreman quit last spring." Arthur's voice carried the weight of confession. "Place has seen better days." Machan surveyed the chaos with calculating eyes. Her fingers traced the dusty tabletop, revealing clean wood beneath. The bones of this place were solid, just buried under layers of a man's poor housekeeping. "You said you needed bookkeeping." He gestured toward the scattered papers. Account books lay open, their pages filled with numbers that told stories of financial struggle. Bills mounted like storm clouds, and income trickled thin as desert streams. She picked up a ledger, its pages yellow with age and coffee stains. The entries were Arthur's handwriting, cramped and uncertain. Numbers didn't lie, and these numbers spoke of a man drowning in debt. "When did you last balance these books?" "Been a while." He removed his hat, running fingers through hair that needed cutting. Never had much head for figures. The admission hung between them, vulnerable as a newborn colt. Machan recognized the courage it took for a man to confess weakness to a woman he barely knew, especially a woman the world had taught him to dismiss. She spent the evening hours organizing papers while Arthur tended the fire. The ledgers revealed a ranch hemorrhaging money through poor record-keeping and missed opportunities. But underneath the chaos, she saw potential. The cattle count was higher than recorded. Breeding records showed promise if managed properly. Land patents held value that Arthur seemed unaware of. This wasn't a failing ranch, but a mismanaged one. "Your herd is worth more than you know." She looked up from the books, meeting his surprised gaze. "These breeding records show bloodlines that command premium prices." Arthur stopped poking the fire. His weathered face showed the expression of a man hearing hope after months of despair. But hope was dangerous when it came too easy. "You sure about that? Numbers don't lie. Poor bookkeeping does." The fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Outside, wind moaned through broken fence posts and rattled loose shutters. The house felt smaller now, filled with possibility instead of despair. Arthur prepared a simple meal while Machan continued working. His movements in the kitchen were efficient but lonely, the habits of a man who'd eaten too many solitary dinners. She watched him from the corner of her eye, noting the careful way he set 2 plates instead of 1. They ate in comfortable silence, the scratch of pencil on paper the only sound beyond the settling house. Arthur's presence was steady as bedrock. Nothing like the nervous energy that had radiated from Dutch. This man carried his troubles quietly, without complaint or dramatics. "You got schooling." It wasn't a question. Some, she didn't elaborate. Her education was hard-won, stolen moments between chores and beatings. Knowledge was power, and she'd learned to hoard it carefully. Arthur nodded, accepting her brevity without pressing. The gesture spoke of a man who understood that some stories were too painful for casual telling. They both carried scars that showed in silence rather than words. The books revealed more secrets as she worked. Arthur had been extending credit to struggling neighbors, letting them pay in promises instead of cash. His generosity was bankrupting him, but the evidence showed a man who chose kindness over profit. Mrs. Henderson's account shows 6 months overdue. Her husband died in a mining accident. She's got 3 children. The explanation was simple as rain, delivered without pride or expectation of praise. Arthur helped, because helping was right, even when it cost him everything. Machan felt something shift in her chest, a small crack in the wall she'd built around her heart. Dawn broke gray and cold, painting the landscape in shades of uncertainty. Machan woke in the small room Arthur had prepared, clean sheets and a quilt that smelled of lavender. She'd slept better than she had in months. Coffee steamed on the kitchen table beside fresh bread and eggs. Arthur sat reading yesterday's newspaper, his face grave in the morning light. The headline spoke of cattle prices rising in Denver, opportunities flowing like water to those who knew how to catch them. Denver market is strong this fall. She poured coffee into a chipped cup, inhaling the bitter comfort. Your cattle could bring good prices if driven before winter. Arthur looked up from his paper, something new in his eyes. Not just hope now, but recognition. He was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a woman to be helped, but as a partner with valuable skills. "You think we could make it work?" The word "we" hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility. Machan set down her cup, studying his face for signs of deception or false promise. She found neither. Maybe, if we're smart about it. Outside, the wind carried the scent of change. The weeks that followed moved with the rhythm of shared purpose. Machan reorganized the ranch operations while Arthur implemented her suggestions. With the quiet faith of a man who'd found water in the desert. The cattle responded to better feed schedules, their coats growing thick and healthy for winter. She worked the numbers each morning before dawn, lamplight casting golden circles on pages that finally balanced. Arthur would find her there, coffee growing cold beside stacks of organized receipts. He'd set fresh coffee by her elbow without words, understanding that her concentration was sacred. The cattle drive to Denver would require precise timing. Too early and the steers would be underweight. Too late and winter storms would block the mountain passes. Machan calculated profit margins while Arthur studied weather patterns, their separate expertise weaving together into something stronger than either could achieve alone. Neighbors began to notice the ranch's transformation. Mrs. Henderson rode over with fresh bread and barely concealed curiosity. Her eyes took in the repaired fences and organized corrals, the healthy cattle and clean-swept yard. She spoke to Arthur but watched Machan, measuring this tall woman who'd brought order from chaos. "Place looks different, Arthur. More alive." Somehow, the compliment was cautious, testing the waters of social acceptability. Arthur accepted it with a nod toward Machan, giving credit where it was due. The gesture was small but significant in a world that preferred to make women invisible. Other ranchers were less subtle in their observations. They rode past more frequently, their eyes hard with questions they wouldn't voice directly. Dutch had poisoned the well with his complaints about Arthur hiring that woman instead of sending her packing. The hostility crystallized one afternoon when neighbors gathered for a cattle branding. Michan organized the supply lists while Arthur worked with the other men, their easy partnership on display. The women whispered in tight clusters, their voices carrying disapproval thick as morning fog. "It ain't natural, a woman doing man's work. And her being what she is makes it worse." The words reached Michan despite their whispered delivery. She continued checking inventory, her face showing nothing of the familiar ache that settled in her chest. Being unwanted was an old pain, worn smooth by repetition. Arthur heard the comments too. His jaw tightened as he branded calves, each movement sharp with controlled anger. When one of the men made a crude observation about Michan's height, Arthur's iron grew hot enough to smoke. "She's done more good for this ranch in a month than some folks do in a lifetime." The defense was quiet, but absolute. The other men fell silent, recognizing the edge in Arthur's voice. Michan felt something warm unfurl in her chest, a dangerous flutter that had nothing to do with gratitude. Evening brought them together in the kitchen, the day's tensions dissolving over shared meals and quiet conversation. Arthur spoke of cattle bloodlines and market prices while Michan balanced books and planned strategies. Their partnership deepened with each passing hour. She caught him watching her sometimes, his gray eyes holding expressions she couldn't decipher. When their hands brushed reaching for the same ledger, neither pulled away immediately. The contact was brief but charged with possibility. The ranch work grew more collaborative. Arthur consulted her on major decisions, trusting her judgment in ways that surprised them both. When a cattle buyer visited, she joined the negotiations, her quick grasp of numbers and market conditions earning grudging respect. Their success bred new challenges. Dutch organized meetings at the saloon, his complaints about Arthur's choices finding fertile ground among men who feared change. The sheriff began asking questions about Michan's background, his interest masquerading as friendly curiosity. "Where did you say you came from, miss?" "Georgia." The answer was brief, offering no additional information for him to examine. Sheriff Coleman's smile was thin as winter ice. His questions probed for weakness, for some legal vulnerability he could exploit. Michan answered carefully, revealing nothing that could be twisted into accusations. The pressure mounted as their cattle grew fat and ready for market. Success made them visible, and visibility brought danger. Arthur felt the weight of watching eyes, the town's judgment settling on his shoulders like winter snow. One night, working late over diseased cattle, they found themselves alone in the barn. The sick animals required constant attention, and Arthur refused to let Michan tend them alone. They worked in comfortable silence, their movements synchronized by weeks of partnership. A calf struggled with fever, its breath coming in harsh gasps. Arthur held the animal steady while Michan administered medicine, her hands gentle but sure. The moment stretched between them, intimate in its shared concern for something helpless. Their faces were close enough that she could see flecks of gold in his gray eyes. His breath warmed her cheek as he whispered encouragement to the suffering animal. The space between them crackled with unspoken possibilities. The calf's breathing eased, and Arthur's relief was palpable. His hand covered hers where it rested on the animal's flank, the touch lasting longer than necessity required. Neither moved away. "You have a gift with them." His voice was rough with something deeper than gratitude. "They respond to kindness." The words hung between them, weighted with meaning that extended beyond sick cattle. Arthur's thumb traced across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it made her breath catch. The barn walls seemed to close around them, creating a world where only they existed. A sound from outside broke the spell. Arthur's hand jerked away as footsteps approached the barn door. They separated with guilty haste, busying themselves with medical supplies as the ranch hand entered to check on the animals. The interruption left them shaken. Michan felt the ghost of Arthur's touch burning on her skin, a brand more permanent than any iron. The feelings growing between them were dangerous, forbidden by laws written and unwritten. Later, walking back to the house under stars that seemed too bright, they maintained careful distance. The air between them hummed with electricity, charged with desires they couldn't voice. Arthur's shoulders carried new tension, the weight of wanting what he couldn't have. Machan lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling while her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd found more than employment at this ranch. She'd found partnership, respect, and something that felt dangerously close to love. Outside her window, the wind carried the scent of coming snow. Winter was approaching, and with it, decisions. That would determine whether their fragile connection could survive the cold. The photograph sat face down on Arthur's desk, its edges worn from handling. Machan found it while organizing papers for the cattle drive, her fingers hesitating before turning it over. A young woman smiled back at her, blonde hair catching. Sunlight, eyes bright with life that had been extinguished. Arthur entered the room as she studied the image. His face went pale as winter sky, the color draining from his weathered features. The photograph trembled in Machan's hands, its weight heavier than paper and ink deserved. "That's Mary." His voice cracked on the name. "My sister." The words fell between them like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread outward into silence. Arthur sank into his chair, his hands gripping the armrests until his knuckles went white. The photograph became a bridge between past and present, connecting wounds that had never properly healed. She was helping freed slaves in Kansas, teaching them to read. Arthur's eyes fixed on something beyond the walls, seeing memories that cut deeper than any blade. The town didn't approve. Machan set the photograph down gently, treating it with the reverence reserved for sacred things. The young woman's smile seemed to illuminate the room, a light that violence had snuffed out too soon. The resemblance between siblings was clear in the shape of their eyes, the stubborn set of their jaws. They came at night. Said she was corrupting the natural order. Arthur's voice was steady but hollow, each word carved from stone. "I was away buying cattle. When I came back, they'd already buried her." The confession hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Machan understood now why Arthur had helped her at the train station, why he'd offered work when others offered only scorn. Guilt was a heavy burden, and helping her was his way of carrying it. "That's why you left Kansas." Arthur nodded, his gray eyes reflecting pain that time had failed to diminish. The ranch was his exile, his attempt to build something meaningful from the ashes of loss. Every act of kindness was a tribute to the sister he'd failed to protect. The wind outside picked up, rattling the windows and stirring dust devils in the yard. Storm clouds gathered on the horizon, dark and pregnant with the promise of change. The air pressure dropped, making the space between them feel charged with electricity. "I should have been there." The words tore from Arthur's throat, raw as fresh wounds. "Should have protected her." Machan moved closer, her tall frame casting shadows across the desk. She'd carried her own burden of survivor's guilt, the weight of those who hadn't escaped the violence she'd fled. Understanding passed between them, wordless and complete. "You couldn't have known." "I should have." Arthur's hands clenched into fists. She was all the family I had left. The photograph smiled up at them, frozen in a moment before hatred had stolen breath from her lungs. Mary's death had carved something from Arthur's soul, leaving a hollow space that no amount of good deeds could fill. Machan recognized the emptiness because she carried her own. Thunder rolled across the prairie, deep and ominous. The storm was building strength, gathering fury from the collision of warm and cold air masses. Arthur stood and moved to the window, his shoulders carrying the weight of confession. "The folks in town don't know. About Mary, about why I left Kansas." He pressed his palms against the glass, watching lightning fork through purple clouds. "If they find out, they'll know why I helped you." The implications settled over them like dust after a windstorm. Arthur's kindness wasn't random charity, but purposeful action, driven by guilt and the need for redemption. If the town discovered his abolitionist connections, both their lives would be in danger. Rain began to fall, fat drops that struck the window like tears from a grieving sky. The storm had arrived with sudden fury, transforming the landscape into a watercolor painting of gray and silver. Arthur's reflection in the glass looked haunted, a man wrestling with ghosts that refused to rest. Michan approached him slowly, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. The space between them felt charged with more than atmospheric pressure. Her hand rose toward his shoulder, then hesitated, hovering in the air like a bird afraid to land. She would be proud of what you've built here. Arthur's reflection met her eyes in the glass. Something passed between them, a recognition of shared pain and mutual understanding. The storm outside mirrored the tempest in their hearts, wild and dangerous and impossible to control. He turned from the window, facing her directly. The distance between them was measured in inches but felt vast as the prairie itself. His eyes held questions that neither dared voice, desires that society had deemed forbidden. Michan. Her name on his lips was a prayer, a plea, a promise all at once. The air between them crackled with possibility. Her hand finally settled on his shoulder, the contact electric through the fabric of his shirt. He covered her hand, with his fingers intertwining in a gesture that spoke of connection deeper than words. Rain hammered the roof with increasing intensity, drowning out the world beyond the walls. They stood together in the lamplight, two broken people finding solace in shared understanding. The weight of loneliness lifted slightly, replaced by something warmer and more dangerous. Arthur's free hand rose to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone. The gesture was tender as spring rain, reverent as a benediction. Michan's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. They leaned closer, drawn by gravity stronger than Earth's pull. The space between them narrowed to nothing, their faces inches apart. Arthur's breath warmed her lips, and she could see her own reflection in his eyes. A sharp crack of thunder shattered the moment. They jerked apart, the spell broken by nature's violent reminder of the storm raging outside. Arthur stepped back, his face flushed with shame and longing in equal measure. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have ... Michan's voice was steady despite the chaos in her chest. "Don't apologize for feeling." The rain continued its assault. On the roof, each drop a reminder of the forces beyond their control. They stood apart now, the distance between them feeling both necessary and unbearable. The moment had passed, but its echo would linger in the spaces between words. Arthur picked up Mary's photograph, holding it like a talisman against the storm. His sister's smile offered no judgment, only the silent encouragement of someone who had died fighting for justice. The past and present collided in the space of a heartbeat, creating possibilities that terrified and thrilled. In equal measure. Outside, the wind howled with the voice of coming winter, carrying warnings of changes that could not be stopped. The cattle drive loomed ahead, their last chance to save the ranch before the snow fell. Success would mean survival, but at what cost to their carefully maintained distance? The storm raged on, washing the world clean while leaving their hearts more tangled than before. The cattle were ready for market, their coats thick with autumn fat, when Sheriff Coleman arrived with papers that smelled of Dutch's desperation. His badge caught the morning light as he dismounted, each step toward the house measured and deliberate. Arthur met him at the porch, his hand resting casually on his belt. "Got a warrant here for the woman." Coleman's voice carried the authority of law twisted into weapon. "She's accused of theft." The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a green fire, acrid and choking. Michan emerged from the house, her tall frame filling the doorway, her dark eyes taking in the scene with calculating calm. She'd seen this theater before, knew how the script was written. "What am I supposed to have stolen?" Money from Dutch van der Berg, says you took it when he rejected your arrangement. The lie was crafted with care, built on the foundation of a woman's vulnerability and a town's prejudice. Dutch had found his revenge in the law's willingness to believe the worst about someone who looked like her. Arthur stepped forward, his body a shield between Michan and the sheriff. That's impossible. She came here with nothing. Coleman's smile was thin as winter ice. His questions over the past weeks had been building toward this moment, gathering information to weave into accusations. The trap had been set with patience, waiting for the right moment to spring. Dutch says different, says she had money that belonged to him. The cattle lowed in the distance, their voices mixing with the wind that carried the scent of coming snow. The market in Denver waited, buyers ready to pay premium prices for healthy stock. All their work was about to turn to dust because of one man's wounded pride. Arthur's jaw worked as he processed the implications. The warrant was legal, even if built on lies. Fighting it would mean involving lawyers they couldn't afford, time they didn't have. The cattle drive would have to wait while they battled accusations in court. She's not going anywhere with you. The words came out flat and final, a line drawn in the dirt with the toe of a boot. Coleman's hand moved to his gun, not drawing but making its presence known. The gesture was subtle, professional, designed to remind Arthur of the consequences of defying lawful authority. Don't make this harder than it has to be, Morgan. Michan stepped forward, her decision made with the quick calculation of someone who'd learned to think 3 moves ahead. She wouldn't let Arthur sacrifice everything for her freedom. The ranch was too important, their success too fragile to risk on a gesture. I'll go with him. No. Arthur's voice cracked with the force of his denial. I won't let them take you. The confession hung between them, heavy with implications neither had voiced. Arthur's feelings were bare now, exposed to the sheriff's interested gaze. Coleman's eyes narrowed as he processed this new information, filing it away for future use. She's coming with me, Morgan. You can't stop it. The wind picked up, stirring dust devils in the yard and rattling the loose boards on the barn. The sky overhead was the color of old pewter, heavy with the promise of snow. Winter was coming whether they were ready or not. Arthur's hand moved toward his gun, then stopped. Violence would only make things worse, give Coleman excuse to escalate. But every instinct screamed against letting them take Michan away. She was part of the ranch now, part of him in ways that defied explanation. Arthur, don't. Michan's voice was steady despite the chaos in her chest. The cattle need to get to market. The practical consideration hit him harder than any physical blow. She was thinking of the ranch even as her freedom crumbled, protecting their shared dream while her own world collapsed. The gesture was so fundamentally her that it made his heart ache. Coleman produced shackles from his saddlebags, the metal cold and unforgiving in the morning air. The sight of them sent rage coursing through Arthur's veins, hot and dangerous. No one should put chains on someone who'd done nothing but improve everything she touched. That's not necessary. Procedure. Coleman's tone brooked no argument. She's accused of theft. The shackles clicked, closed around Michan's wrists. With the sound of doors slamming shut, Arthur felt each click in his bones, a physical pain that spread through his chest. She held her head high despite the restraints, dignity intact even in defeat. I'll get you out of this. Arthur's promise was fierce as winter. Wind, I'll find a way. Michan met his eyes, seeing the desperation there. She wanted to tell him not to risk everything for her, but the words stuck in her throat. Part of her needed to believe he would fight for her, that someone in this world valued her enough to take risks. Coleman helped her onto his horse, his touch impersonal as death. Arthur watched every movement, memorizing details, looking for weaknesses in the sheriff's routine. His mind was already working on solutions, possibilities, ways to free her from this trap. Don't do anything stupid, Morgan. Coleman swung into his saddle. This is legal business. The horses' hooves struck the ground with finality as they rode away. Arthur stood in the yard, watching until they disappeared into the distance, taking part of his soul with them. The ranch felt empty without her presence, hollowed out and meaningless. The cattle needed attention, but Arthur couldn't focus on mundane tasks. His mind churned with plans and possibilities, each more desperate than the last. The law was against him, but justice was on his side. The question was how to make justice prevail in a world that preferred convenient lies to uncomfortable truths. He saddled his horse with shaking hands, each movement fueled by purpose that burned bright as forge fire. The ride to town would give him time to think, to plan, to find the courage for what came next. Michan needed him, and he wouldn't fail her the way he'd failed Mary. The sky darkened as he rode, storm clouds gathering like an army on the horizon. The wind carried the scent of snow and change, of endings and beginnings wrapped together in the same cold breath. Whatever came next would reshape everything they'd built. Arthur's horse thundered across the prairie, carrying him toward a confrontation that would define the rest of his life. Behind him, the cattle waited for a drive that might never come. Ahead, the woman who'd become his world sat in chains, accused of crimes that existed only in small minds and smaller hearts. The storm was coming, and there was no shelter from what it would bring. Arthur reached the jailhouse as the first snowflakes began to fall, each flake a reminder of time running out. The building squatted on Main Street like a tumor, its barred windows promising nothing but darkness. He dismounted with purpose that burned bright as forge fire, his boots striking the wooden walkway with the rhythm of a man who'd made his final decision. Inside, Michan sat on a narrow cot, her tall frame folded with dignity despite the circumstances. The cell was small and cold, designed to break spirits through sheer misery. She looked up as Arthur entered, her dark eyes reflecting something between hope and resignation. "You shouldn't be here. I'm exactly where I need to be." Arthur's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. "This ends now." Sheriff Coleman emerged from his office, his badge catching the lamplight. The man's satisfaction was evident. In every line of his body, the pleasure of someone who'd successfully sprung a trap. Arthur's presence was expected, another piece falling into place. "Come to confess your own crimes, Morgan?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dirty fire. Arthur studied Coleman's face, seeing the cruel intelligence there, the careful planning that had led to this moment. The sheriff wasn't just Dutch's tool, but a predator in his own right. "I've come to tell the truth." Arthur's declaration filled the small jail with electricity. He stood straighter, his shoulders squaring as he prepared to lay everything bare. The cost would be enormous, but some things were worth any price. Michan Washington is innocent of all charges. She came here with nothing but hope and was rejected for being different. Arthur's voice grew stronger with each word. "I'm the one who helped her, because it was right, because she deserved better than what she got." Coleman's smile was sharp as broken glass. The confession was exactly what he'd hoped to hear, evidence that could be twisted into whatever shape served his purposes. Arthur was walking into a trap with his eyes wide open. "Interesting. Go on. I love her." The words came out clean and simple, truth distilled to its essence. "I intend to marry her, and anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me." The admission reverberated through the jail like thunder. Michan's breath caught, her heart hammering against her ribs. Arthur had just declared war on everything the town believed, painting a target on both their backs. Coleman's hand moved to his gun, the gesture casual but threatening. He'd expected confession, not open defiance. Arthur was supposed to grovel, to beg for mercy while accepting the town's judgment. Instead, he stood tall as a mountain, immovable and proud. "That's a dangerous thing to say, Morgan. Truth usually is." The standoff stretched between them, two men representing different worlds, different values. Outside, the snow fell harder, blanketing the town in white that would soon turn to gray slush. Winter was claiming the land, transforming everything it touched. Footsteps echoed on the wooden walkway, multiple sets approaching with purpose. Arthur tensed, expecting Dutch's mob to burst through the door. Instead, Mrs. Henderson entered, followed by 3 other neighbors whose faces showed grim determination. "We need to talk, Coleman." The sheriff's confidence wavered as he faced the unexpected arrivals. These weren't troublemakers but respected members of the community, people whose opinions carried weight. Their presence changed the dynamics of the confrontation. "This is official business, folks. You need to move along. Our business is with you." Mrs. Henderson's voice carried the authority of someone who'd buried a husband and raised children alone. "We know what Dutch has been doing, and we know you've been helping him." The accusations hit Coleman like physical blows. His carefully constructed plan was crumbling, exposed by people who'd been watching and waiting for the right moment. Arthur felt hope kindle in his chest, a flame that had nearly died. "Don't know what you're talking about. The land deals, the false claims, the money that's been disappearing." Another neighbor stepped forward, his weathered face hard as winter ground. "We've been tracking it for months." The evidence poured out in a steady stream, each revelation another nail in Coleman's coffin. The fake sheriff's badge, the forged documents, the conspiracy to steal land from struggling ranchers. Dutch's petty revenge had exposed a larger crime that reached deep into the town's foundations. Coleman's hand moved toward his gun, desperation making him dangerous. Arthur stepped forward, his body shielding Mitchen's cell. The moment balanced on a knife's edge, one wrong move from exploding into violence. Don't make it worse than it already is. The real sheriff arrived as Coleman's nerve finally broke. The man surrendered without a fight, his schemes collapsing under the weight of evidence. Arthur unlocked Mitchen's cell with shaking hands, the key turning with a sound that meant freedom. She stepped out into the lamplight, her tall frame casting long shadows on the jail walls. Arthur reached for her, his hands framing her face with reverence reserved for sacred things. The distance between them disappeared as she stepped into his arms. "I meant what I said." His voice was rough with emotion. "About loving you, about marrying you. I know." Her answer was whispered against his lips. "I love you too." The kiss was gentle as spring rain, tender as new grass pushing through winter soil. Around them, the town watched with expressions ranging from acceptance to curiosity. Change was coming whether they welcomed it or not. 6 months later, the ranch flourished under their joint management. Spring had transformed the landscape, bringing new life to ground that had seemed barren. Arthur and Mitchen stood on their porch, watching cattle graze in pastures that stretched toward mountains still capped with snow. The school she'd established operated out of their barn, children of all colors learning together under her patient guidance. The sight of young minds opening to possibility filled her heart with purpose she'd never imagined. Arthur's arm circled her waist, pulling her close as evening painted the sky in shades of gold and pink. She leaned into his strength, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. Her height, once a source of shame, now seemed perfectly designed for this moment. "No regrets?" he asked, his lips brushing her temple. "None." She turned in his arms, seeing her future reflected in his gray eyes. "You gave me more than just a home. What did I give you? Everything." The word was simple but complete, encompassing love and respect and the chance to be herself without apology. "You gave me everything." The wind carried the scent of growing things, of hope taking root in fertile soil. Their ranch was more than a business now, but a symbol of what was possible when people chose love over fear, acceptance over prejudice. Mitchen stood tall beside the man who'd seen her worth when others saw only differences. Together, they'd built something beautiful from the ashes of rejection, proving that home wasn't a place but a feeling, a certainty that you belonged exactly where you were. The future stretched before them, bright with possibility and warm with the promise of love that would endure all seasons. And that is all to the story for now. Please let me know where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will create a story there. Consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and if you enjoy our content, click this video on your screen. I promise you, it's worth watching. See you tomorrow.